is so great to have everybody. Good morning. Let's all get in here, get settled in. Let's open up our Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 17 we're going to be covering today. 24 verses, if I'm not mistaken, in 1 Kings 17. So to bring everybody up to speed, what's been going on in our Kings and Kingdoms Divided series is the North, whom we've been covering for some time now, Israel, has been in conflict with what neighbor? With what neighbor has Israel been doing some battle? Judah, very good. Just to the south, the sister kingdom. This isn't good. Family fights. We don't like this. Not much fun. However, by the end of our last class period, we began to learn a better way, and we don't have to be feuding with one another as family. So there starts to be some more civility between the two, between these neighbors of God's people. That's a positive thing. However, conflict is going to remain. We're going to be fighting against a new enemy that's actually a little bit of an old nemesis in the land of Canaan, and that is the god Baal. Who's reigning over Israel right now? Israel. We were just introduced to him. We haven't covered the majority of his reign. I'll give you a hint. Omri was before him, and this one is Omri's child, Ahab. And what does Ahab's name mean? Basically, yeah. Father's brother. Obviously he's not dad's brother, he's dad's son, but it's that he's just like his daddy. And how was daddy? Worthless. he was a mess. And this guy's just like him, and we read last time at the end of chapter 16, just like these kings who are the predecessors, that this one, each stage, just continues to be one step worse than what the other one was. Well, we're picking up involving this drought that's coming upon the land in Israel. Chapter 17, verse 1 of 1 Kings. And Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead said to Ahab, this guy Elijah just kind of just appears on the scene. And wow, it's going to be a whirlwind for sure, a whirlwind of righteousness as far as the prophet goes. I want to show you a map and talk about this just a little bit. But before we get to the locations themselves, Elijah, or maybe better pronounced Elijah, what does his name mean? Now, even if we don't know the exactness of it, just think about this as you hear Elijah. What would that tell you? The ending of his name, Yah. Very good. So that's a shortened form of Yahweh, the self-existent sovereign ruler of the universe. So he has God in his name. We know that much. And the first part, Eli, which by the way, you remember when Jesus was on the cross? Eli, Eli. Or in the Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi. And how's that translated from Hebrew? That first part, it's repeated. Eli, Eli. Close. My God. Very good, my God. So it's my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. But this first part, my God, so you have Elijah or Elijah, and you have my God, and then the ending of his name we established is Yah or Yahweh. And so literally his name means my God is Yahweh. I find that intriguing. You go back, how did we leave off in chapter 16? So we were being introduced to this new king, the son of Omri. His name is Ahab. And notice in verse 29 of chapter 16, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, that's why we're still in Israel. There's been this big, long reign, 41 years of Asa is still going on when Ahab becomes king. Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel. And he's going to reign over Israel and Samaria 22 years. He does evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who are before him. We're told in verse 31, and it came to pass, as though it had been a trivial, a small thing, as if, for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the golden calf worship, the son of Nebat, that he ups the ante. He took his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, and we'll talk more about the king of, and to review that here in just a little bit. But Ethbaal, so that's Jezebel's daddy, means with Baal. She's a pagan woman from a pagan land, taken from the neighbors up to the northwest, the Phoenicians, or some would say the Syro-Phoenicians. And her name is Jezebel. Okay, any recollections as to what Jezebel means? Jezebel. Does that help? I know it's not spelled that way here, but it's a derivative of that. Basically, very good. Yeah, nice there. So we have worshiper of Baal, more or less is what it means. A little more strictly, it's Baal exalts, as in Baal has exalted me. Or Baal is husband to. Baal is husband to this one, meaning I'm married to Baal. Strong commitment. And then a third definition, unchaste or impure. And that may be more down the road what that comes. But the point is this, whenever you flip back, well, first of all, let me say in verse 32, then he, after he takes her as wife, set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal, which he had built in the capital city of Samaria. So we go back to our text, chapter 17, verse 1. And Elijah, by name we're told, my God is Yahweh, comes onto the scene, right after we've been introduced to someone whose God is Baal, in a position of ruling power. Someone who by name is married to Baal, someone comes along now who is married to Yahweh. I see conflict on the horizon. It's almost like these two are being set up as these powerful entities. You have this political ruler who's married to Baal versus this religious ruler who's married to Yahweh. I think tensions are going to continue to build until eventually they have to try to find out whose God is greater, which one is stronger. Elijah is the Tishbite. Here's where I want to look at this map. Notice at the about midway up on the right side of the screen, Tishbe. And we're told of the inhabitants of Gilead, which makes a lot of sense because Gilead is the land where? Gilead to them is kind of like the Ozarks to us. Gilead is a region where? East. Yeah, good. I think you both said it. Justin and Marty, on the east side of the Jordan River. So it's this raised plain over here on this side. And if you'll notice, Tishbe, again, is about in the center of the map on the right side of the screen. He comes from here. I find it significant, the meaning of this term. This town, Tishbe, means captivity. How fitting this is. The Israelites are being held captive right now. Many of them against their own will. They're not allowed to leave and go worship the true God of Israel. Some might be doing it, but if they get caught, I'm sure there are going to be some significant consequences for that. They can't leave and go do that in Jerusalem, and they're being held captive, many of them against their will, just to live life normally and to serve their God. So this guy whose name means my God is Yahweh, who's living in captivity, or Elijah by name, from Tishbe of the land of Gilead, said to Ahab, who's now the ruler of God's people, as the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, except at my word. I'd like to share with you a couple of remarks from James Smith's Old Testament commentary. He mentions Tisbe was about 8 miles north of the Jabbok River, and the text box just starts to cover that a little bit, where you see fed by the ravens, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. But that stream that's coming down here just a little bit to the south, you have the forks, and they come together, and then they run into the Jordan River. That's the Jabbok River. And he says it's in the rugged region of Gilead. This is a raised plain. Because his manner, that is Elijah's, matched the terrain from which he came, Elijah was frequently called simply the Tishbite. When this name would be brought up, the Tishbite, it would be, people would think, oh, this is the area this is really rough. Well, then Elijah synonymously becomes known as the Tishbite, who comes from there because he's just kind of a rough guy. Oh, and I don't mean by that like he's, has language like a sailor, no offense back here. But you know what I mean. He's just kind of rough in his demeanor. How so? What do you recall about Elijah, even though we're just now introduced to him? What have you studied about him before? Elijah, what do you know about this guy? What's rough about him? He dresses differently. He acts differently. He eats differently. Probably smells differently. All right, so what is Elijah wearing? And I know it's not mentioned right here. John the Baptist, he comes in the spirit of Elijah. You might think along those lines. His animal skin, like camel's hair, leather belt, the diet of locusts and honey. This guy's just a wild mountain man, and how fitting. I mentioned the Ozarks earlier. It's kind of a rugged region. We're kind of a rugged people, aren't we? The natives of us who are from here, and it's similar to this. I mean, it's just a backwoods country boy is Elijah. Yet he comes onto the scene, and arguably, I mentioned this last week, the greatest prophet that God has ever had to date. He's not this super refined, probably polished speaker, but he just loves the Lord and he loves his ways. And he doesn't pull any punches when he talks about God and the kind of people that we need to be. And so this is the kind of guy he is. He becomes known as the Tishbite. Tishbe is a rough, rugged region. How fitting, because this is a rough, rugged man. Now it's mentioned here he announces a drought that's going to come on the land. He's not being unfair in this pronouncement. This is something that the people of the Lord have known for some time. Keep your spot in our text. Let's turn to Deuteronomy, the 11th chapter. And in chronology, we're rewinding here more than half a millennium. Deuteronomy chapter 11. This is in the original giving of the law, technically the second giving of the law, right around the time that it was originally given, Deuteronomy 11. And we're going to start reading some familiar verses in 18. Deuteronomy 11:18. So God communicating through his leader at this time, Moses, "You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you are sitting in your house, and when you are walking by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." So as God's giving his law, he's letting them know, listen, religion isn't something that you do casually here and there. It's a lifestyle. It's a full commitment to me. And not just for you personally, but also for those, if you're in a leadership role, who are closest to you. If you're parents, you pass these along to your kids, and you give them to your grandkids, and so on. Verse 20, "You shall write them on the doorposts of your house." And that could be whenever you're entering your house. So everything that goes on in your home is governed by these laws because of our relationship together. And on your gates, whenever you leave your house behind, these laws govern everything you do, everything you say, every way you think, because of our relationship that we have together. "That your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land, that the Lord swore to your fathers to give them as long as the heavens are above the earth." Okay, so we're familiar with these kinds of teachings, right? But now I ask you to move upward just a little bit in this same text. Look up at verse 13 as he introduces this. And he says, here's the relevance behind what I'm telling you of how you need to keep your commitment strong, build on your relationship daily with the Lord. Verse 13. "And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, this is if, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, which are staples in the land of Canaan." This is the agriculture, and this is the wealth of the land. If you don't have this, you're going to be in bad shape. Be in poverty, as in like maybe barely surviving poverty. You recall what happens from the famine that takes place in the land of Canaan that leads the Israelites some years back to go into Egypt. When there's no rain, that's what happens. People starve to death back in this agricultural time in Canaan. And it's not just the Israelites who depend on this grain, but as well, it's their economy, and they're exporting, and they're trading, and they're selling, and areas around depend on it, and they're in bad shape too if Israel doesn't have this grain. So verse 15 of Deuteronomy 11, "And he will give grass in your fields for your livestock," agricultural, it's all about this, "and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, though, and you turn aside, and you serve other gods, and you worship them." What happens then? Verse 17, "Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you." I invite you to return now to our text. Chapter 17 of 1 Kings and verse 1. Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead said to Ahab, the king now ruling, as the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be no dew nor rain these years, except at my word. This is nothing new. This is a fulfillment of a conditional promise that God made. And this is a little more on the threat side of things. If you go after other gods, the heavens are going to shut up. And they're not going to give you any rain. You're going to be in big trouble. Your economy will be depleted, but worse than that, you'll be scraping by for survival. Now, the second of the two comments I advertised to you also comes from the same source. The normal rainy season in Palestine is from December to March. This is a hot, arid place of the earth. And their winter is probably a little more their rainy season. And you see that in really hot places. But this is the rainy season, which is equivalent to our winter, from December to March. The rest of the year, the earth receives moisture from the dew, which at times can be as heavy as a drizzle. And then the extra special years, you might get in the fall, the rains that come. You know how that is here. You depend on the spring, right? And for all the rain that comes. And if the rains come in late summer and early fall, well, you might get a second cutting. That's the case. But you can't count on that. Well, that's like what it is, but it's far more arid in this part of the world than what it is right here, much warmer also. All right, so this is the fulfillment of God's promise that he made more than 600 years prior. Verse 2 of 1 Kings 17, then the word of the Lord came to him, to Elijah, saying, you, though, need to get away from here and turn eastward and hide by the brook Kerith, which flows into the Jordan. If you'll notice up to the northwest of where we are in Tishbe, and so I think probably what you have taking place here is Elijah being depicted, and we're going to see why here in a moment, but facing this direction, the west for him. And as he travels a little bit west, God says, I want you to turn aside then to the east, not too far, just a little bit, to the brook Kerith. I want you to hang out in that place. It flows into the Jordan. Here's why, verse 4, and it will be that you shall drink from that brook. You need to go get by a water source because a drought is coming upon the land. And remember, we're not talking about, I don't have all the money I once did. It's like you're trying to survive. That's how rough it's going to get in Israel. It will be that you shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. You think God always finds a way to take care of his own. When times are hard and everyone else can't hardly find food to scrape by, I'm going to use my creation to bring food into you. You're not going to have to worry about that. You're following me. Remember Jesus' promise. Seek first the things that really matter. And all these things, food, water, and clothing, shall be given or provided to you. He doesn't say that you're always going to be able to provide for yourself and you don't need anyone else, but that your God is always going to make provision for you, whatever it takes. God, at a time, this drought is coming, so you need to go camp out by this stream. It's kind of an isolated area. You have a water source. You'll be okay for that. What am I going to do for food? Don't worry about it. I have the birds. I own them all, and they're going to fly in all the food. This is a pretty good gig for Elijah. Verse 5, so he went and he did according to the word of the Lord, because that's who he is. He's a person of faith who follows what the Lord says. For he went and he stayed by the brook Kerith, which flows into the Jordan. The ravens brought him, it's a 2-course meal, not too bad, out in the desert by yourself. Brought him bread and meat in the morning. That's fascinating, isn't it? I wonder who's baking that bread. It's brought in to him. I don't know if these ravens are swooping in and taking them, and people are trying to bat them away. And however it is, you get this baked bread, and they bring into him, and this food in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, so he has plenty to eat each day to get by, and the water that he needs. He drinks from the brook. And it happened after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. It's not going to be until chapter 18 that we find out just exactly how long there's been no rain on the land. But the water sources, one by one, they begin to dry up. And now what's Elijah supposed to do? I thought God was providing for him at this stream. You think God's forgotten about his own? He's going to make sure that he has it's not about the place we are. It's about the one who's with us. How often do we get worked up and stressed out about, oh, am I in the right place for, maximum blessing in my life, and so on? It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you love God, you keep your faith in him, and you follow him. And if you do that, he always provides for you. Now, it may not always be that you can provide for yourself, and you don't need anyone or anything to help you, but your God will always make provision for you. So we've had this drought in Israel, and things are getting really rough. Well, things are about to get really interesting in the life of Elijah and those who surround him, starting in verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. Keep in mind who a widow is, and especially in this time. Of course, she has no husband living, and especially in this age, when there's a widow, and sometimes in our own also, there's real scarcity within that household. And so God says, I'm going to have you to leave your own country behind. You're going to go to Phoenicia, up to the northwest, or some would call it Syro-Phoenicia. By this point, to Zarephath. You see that about in the middle, at the very tippy top of the screen. This is not, I want to repeat, among God's people. I want you to leave your country so that I'm going to make provision for you. Where would you think he would have him go? What kind of household? Maybe like a king's house would make a lot of sense, where they have abundance. I'm going to ask you to leave the land of milk and honey and a plenty behind normally, to go to a land where there's not as much as what there is here. And I'm going to send you to a household of poverty to take care of you. Faith is what this is about. Do we believe God when he sends us providentially somewhere, when he wants us to go, and we think, well, that doesn't make sense, because this compared to... Sometimes he purposely chooses things that don't make sense to test our faith in him. We had before too long a study in a sermon setting pertaining to Abraham and Isaac coming up. And God for a quarter of a century has made these promises about this child, and the child finally comes and he's starting to mature, and he says, okay, now I want you to kill him. That doesn't make sense. God knows that it doesn't make sense. He's testing the faith of this one. Are you now relying on the gift that I have given, or am I the giver of all good gifts? Very common for the Lord to do. And so I think he may be testing the faith of his prophet here. But the question is, why would he have him go to this place named Zarephath? Names have been significant all the way up to this point, and I think they continue to be. The meaning of Zarephath, this is some obscure city in Phoenicia. Why not Tyre? Why not Sidon? They're really well-known places. The meaning of Zarephath is refinery. Refinery. What's a refinery? Especially at this time. I know it's somewhat a little different for us today, but very good. It's a place of purification, by meaning anyway. I don't know if that's actually, probably was going on there and originally named for that reason. But a purifying, and at this time of what? Good, yeah, an application. As far as the physicality goes, of precious metals, probably. It's fire being applied to burn away all the impurities, so all that you have left is just that which is whole and precious and valuable. You do this with gold, you do this with silver, you do this with bronze. How fitting in this age, in a time of captivity, when the people of God are being oppressed by all this idolatry and their leadership, or Tishbe, captivity. God calls him, to this prophet, to leave this land behind. My God is Yahweh, my fidelity, my allegiance is to him, and to go in a place that means refinery. This might be some foreshadowing. I know we're not there, and we'll talk about it, the good Lord willing, the next time we're together for this Bible class. But 1 Kings 18, in the battle that takes place, what's going to come down from heaven to prove who's really God? Fire. All right? And so through refinery, through fire, God is going to burn up the impurities in the land of Israel, at least give the people the opportunity to do so, so that which is only precious, true faith will remain behind. So that could be one reason why he's sent to Zarephath. The second reason he could be sent to this place, any ideas? I see a possibility of 3 here. And they may all have application. Okay, so Justin says maybe to produce more believers. I think you may be exactly right, Justin. And we're going to see that take place in the life of one who's actually just a Gentile up there. I think God's concerned about this soul that really could be attached to him. Very good. What else? That's one I hadn't actually thought of that would fit. Okay, he's going to perform a miracle in that place, absolutely. How popular do you think Elijah is in Israel right now? Hey, guess what? The economy's about to go, and I'm going to control whether the economy goes up. All of our families, we're all about to starve. I'm going to control whether we survive. See you later. People probably aren't really fond of him at the moment. Yeah, you agree? Okay. Yeah, it would seem to be that way. That could be a second thing. But a third one is this. I ask you to turn back to chapter 16 at the end. We read this kind of leading into our Bible class as a review from last week. Verse 30, chapter 16. Now Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. It came to pass as though it had been just a small thing, trivial matter, to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. And he went and served Baal, worshipped him, set up an altar, builds a temple for Baal in the capital city of Samaria. So who's from this place? Jezebel. And how ironic that to find perhaps asylum and to try to refine the faith of God's people, God would send his most faithful prophet out of the land of what should be godliness into the worst pagan reaches possible to almost try to work as a foreign missionary then to his own people. That's a sad state of affairs in Israel, is it not? And by the way, this isn't the only time this is going to happen in the scope of biblical text. Where does Jesus, the little baby Jesus and Jesus' family, his mom and his dad, where do they have to go to find safety so that the king of the Jews is not slaughtered in the land of the Jews, Israel? Where do they have to go? Egypt. Why is that ironic? The very place out of which God's people had come so that they weren't killed and the babies that were being threatened to be slaughtered, they had to leave and go into the land of Canaan to produce this land of godliness. Now in the land of godliness, you have to go, leave, and enter into the land of oppression just to find asylum. And so that gives us an idea of just how rotten things have become here in Israel. Elijah's almost going to work now as a foreign missionary from the land of Baal because there seems to be more tolerance for the true living God, Yahweh, in that place than there is even in Yahweh's own country. It's become a land of Baal. See, I have commanded a widow there, verse 9 of 1 Kings 17, to provide for you. Verse 10, so he arose and he went to this place, Zarephath, refinery. And when he came to the gate of the city, indeed, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, please bring me a little drink in a cup, a little water in a cup, that I may drink. Some background to this historically, people in this area, they almost looked at it as a sacred duty to provide drink for those who are in need. And so as a part of maybe her background or upbringing, her religion, she'd drop everything she's doing. Hey, this is really important. We need to get this guy a drink. Verse 11, and as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, hey, while you're doing that, why don't you bring me a morsel of bread in your hand? I'm hungry. Well, duh, everybody's hungry right now. It's a time of famine. So while you're bringing me that water, which she considers to be her sacred duty, why don't you give me something to eat also? That's where she half draws the line. Verse 12, so she said, as the Lord your God lives. I think wording and names here are significant. Apparently she knows about the God of Israel. In real translation here, she says, as Yahweh your Elohim, using Hebrew terminology. She knows the name of Israel's God. As Yahweh lives, I recognize you're a servant of Yahweh. I do not have bread to give you, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. That's all I have left in this time of famine. And see, I am gathering a couple of sticks, that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. This is our Last Supper. And I recognize that to be the case. I've been thinking about this. We've been conserving all that we can, and this is all that we have left. I came out to get these sticks, and I was going to go back and make a fire and mix up this oil and this flour. We're going to eat this, and then we're just going to sit around together until we die of hunger. Providence of God. Right before the last meal is had, he sends the prophet onto the scene. Verse 13, and Elijah said to her, do not fear. Well, that's easy for you to say. We're about to die. There's no hope for us. It'll be all right. Don't be afraid. But as you have said, you have just a little bit left. Make me a small cake from it first and bring it to me. And afterward, make some for yourself and your son. This doesn't make any sense, right? From a material perspective here, this is all we have, just a little bit so we can eat. And he says, yeah, just cut into that and give me some first, and then you and your son can eat. Eat what? A bite? It's only a handful of flour with which to start. This is an opportunity for this woman to demonstrate some faith in the God of Israel. Verse 14, for thus the Lord God of Israel says, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but we're talking about a period of years. This is not, hey, this is going to last you 3 or 4 more days, which would be hard to believe of itself. For years, this is going to be the food that you need to survive. Doesn't make sense. Nevertheless, verse 15, she went away and did according to the word of Elijah. I think names are significant here. She did according to the word of, what's Elijah mean? My God is Yahweh. Probably hasn't been up to this point, but now she's starting to act as if her God is Yahweh also. There might be some consequences for this, John. Very much so. Yeah, thank you. I don't think Elijah probably gets enough credit, really. But we do. The Jews recognized him as that, though. And you do. You see that on the Mount of Transfiguration. There are 3. Jesus, wow. And without a question, God shows it greater than all, right? He's the most important. Moses, well, we get that. The giver of the law, leader of God's people. And Abraham, Job, no, Elijah. That's who. At just the right time. Side note, John, thank you for tying that in. When did Jesus come? Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of the time had come, just at the perfect time. Romans chapter 5, 6 through 8. At the right, or just the precise time. Jesus, God's all about timing, isn't he? There's a flair for the dramatic. And in this case right here, the woman is about to eat her last meal. And just at that time, wouldn't you know, that the prophet shows up. To God, timing is everything. Thank you for those comments, John. Well said. We need to say verse 16 because that's our memory work, but we can't look at our screens or our papers as we do so. 1 Kings 17:16. Close your Bibles. No, you don't have to, but please don't look. Who would like to stay? Which really is just kind of a repetition. At first it's given as a prophecy, and here as well it's actually carried out. 17:16. Let's go, John. Isn't that something? Just like God had said. And remember, we're not talking about, for a few more days or a couple of weeks. You're talking for a period of years. There's a handful of flour, and there's just a little bit of oil in the bottom of a jar. And it continues to be used day after day after day. And the flour is not depleted, nor is the oil. Now comes the time to consider what kind of lessons can we draw out of this. I mean, it's cool, it's Elijah, and it's this widow, and a neat period of miracles in the Bible. What does this mean for us today? Doesn't mean anything. Very good. So what John is saying from Matthew 6, and especially the latter portion of that, and it's about the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus repeats this essential promise for our time. You put me first, and I'm always going to take care of you. Good, John. Paul, what do you have, Dad? There you go. Which is instrumental in Jesus' teaching. For those who might not have heard, the remark he was making tying in about how God's promises are day-to-day living. It's not, hey, 58 years from now, I'm going to... And sometimes he does that, right? But that's not the guarantee behind it. The guarantee is the day-to-day operations. And sometimes on that basis, from this day I'll take care of it, then we get to the next day. But is that not what he says at the end of, hey, seek first the kingdom of God, all these things will be added to you, the righteousness. And then he mentions, do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. When it's needed, it will be provided. I better not mention any more about Abraham because that's coming up, but it's so powerful. And it's just from cover to cover of Scripture. It really ties in. All right, so I want to look at one passage for us. 2 Corinthians, and we could do this with countless. I just want to give one example. 2 Corinthians 9, if you don't mind to flip over to that spot. Verse 6 starting, 2 Corinthians 9. When he's talking about the wonderful gift of giving, just like what we find in 1 Kings 17. He says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And he who sows bountifully or much will also reap bountifully or much. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not reluctantly or not from compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And then we say, but if I do that, then I'm not going to have, and maybe even enough to get by in the necessities of life. Is that not what Jesus covers in Matthew 6? Don't worry about these things. He's not talking about the big homes, the flashy automobiles, and the iPhone 17,000, okay? He's not talking about your Xboxes here. He says, don't worry about these things. They're the necessities of life. Food, water, clothing, the things you have to have. Don't even worry about those. Put first things first, and God will take care of all of these things. And it might not be 58 years in advance, okay, that he's going to set things up for you financially, but you're guaranteed day-to-day operations are always going to work out. All right, so we're in 2 Corinthians 9. Continue just a little bit more here with me. He says, or when you're worrying, saying, what am I going to do then about even my life's necessities? God is able to make all grace abound to you always, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. You might not always know from where it's going to come and how it's going to work out, but that's the beauty of faith, is what he's saying. God doesn't operate on or by the rules of the physical. He's a spiritual being, and the spiritual puts things that seem to be impossible into the physical realm to make them work for his own. We could keep reading in 2 Corinthians 9, but we don't have time. Let's go back to our text and let's finish this up now. Verse 17. So you might say, well the woman, wow, God, you can't outgive God. We say that, right? The woman gives what? Just a tiny little fraction, which is a huge sacrifice because that's everything, essentially, that she has left. And how much does God give her in return? Just in the physical. I would say easily 1,000 times more than she gave to God's service. And that's the way God works. You can't outgive God, even when it doesn't make material sense. But I believe the greatest gift in return is yet to come. Verse 17, now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick, and his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. That's a kind way of saying he died. So she said to Elijah, or my God is Yahweh, what have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son? I think what she's saying here is, I've essentially showed this fidelity to Yahweh and I've helped you out. And now my sins are being remembered against me. She recognizes she's a sinner, undeserving of good things. But now I'm being punished. And he said to her, give me your son. She has nothing left of meaning. The only thing I think that would have any significance left to her is the deceased body of this child. Before it's, hey, give me some of your flour and give me some of your oil. Oh, that's my food, but that's not my everything. Give me your child. So he took him out of her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord, my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son?" It's a question, not a statement. And he stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord, my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him." Then the Lord heard the voice of Elijah. The soul of the child came back to him and it revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." The first time, she gives away a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. And God gives her 1,000 measures plus, perhaps, of oil and flour in return. This time, she's been asked for the greatest gift. Give me the body of your child. The only thing she has left to be attached to. And apparently, she has enough faith, even in her discouragement and in her depression or sorrow, to hand the child over. What does she get in return? She gives a dead child, and she receives 1,000 times more, plus more, in return, a living child. Verse 24, then the woman said to Elijah, "Now by this I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth." Justin, I agree with you, and I think sometimes gets overlooked that in part, I believe God sends his Jewish prophet to this pagan land to make a believer of a heart that wants him. And I think sometimes we overlook that, and this woman now understands. And as we close, I just want to mention this in passing. I think we could see some shades of Jesus in this story. And I say that as a suggestion that you have a practice of 3, a number of 3, and then you have resurrection from the dead. Might it have something to do with the Christ and producing some type of typical faith in him? The other thing is this: you have a heart that is hungry and is seeking after food. But instead of giving food that's just going to last for a little time, she receives food that's going to last her for the entirety of the time that she needs it, even though there's no way to explain how that food is going to take care of her. Could this be a symbolic reference to Jesus, the bread of life? And whenever we're so hungry and we eat of him, he satisfies. He quenches our hunger for as long as we need it. I'm not sure, but it could be some shades of that in an advertisement of Jesus. John? Right, good question. Well, one thing's for sure, if she had no confidence at all, why would she ever have given the flour and the oil in the first place, right? Personally, you draw your own conclusions, but I believe this is a case of, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I think this is shades of Jesus' apostles coming to him, Lord, increase our faith. Well, they're given their opportunity. You know, when Jesus is betrayed and they all turn around and run, do they not believe in him at all? I think they do. But when given opportunities later, they stand firmly, and every one of them, maybe with the exception of one, proudly, gladly gives his life for Jesus. Yeah, and once again, and I appreciate you bringing that up, John, you have in the case of Abraham, he's going into the land of Egypt, and the promise is going to come as his children and through Sarah, right? But then he feels like he has to lie about his wife to keep himself and to keep Sarah alive. Well, then later he's called to sacrifice his son. All right, let's go do it. Is it that he doesn't believe in God in the beginning? Or is it that he believes and just maybe not as greatly as God would rather have it and what he will be later in life? He's human, there you go. And I think that's the case with this woman. I think she has a faith. But early on, I think it's like, yeah, I could see how this could be true and really be the case. And now it's like, I have no doubts, no reservations left at all. I think is what it is at the end. Yeah, great question, John. But again, draw your own conclusions. I may be a little off on that. Any other comments as we wind up our class period? Next time, chapter 18. It's like 46 verses. I don't know that we'll get through all of it. It is action-packed. We're going to try, though. So please read and mull over all the contents of chapter 18. Verse 22. You ever feel like you're alone? Elijah did. Very alone. That's our memory verse, 22, for next time. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.